Desire is seen as weakness, but what if it's your greatest strength? Repressing desire suffocates your soul, creating shadows that silently dominate you. What if the secret to true freedom isn't running from desire, but integrating it? Imagine transforming this energy into creative power, living spirituality, real mastery over instincts. Get ready for a journey where unconscious desire meets light, and shadow integration opens doors to self-mastery. Jung already knew, mastering desire is first and foremost mastering yourself. Are you ready to discover the path? There's an old and dangerous misconception that desire is a destructive force, a temptation to be eliminated. This thinking, rooted in centuries of sexual repression and religious moralisms, still silently shapes our decisions. But for those seeking shadow integration, the truth is different. Unconscious desire isn't the problem. The problem is the blindness with which we deny it. Mastering instincts doesn't mean suffocating them, but understanding them deeply with the eyes of someone who's tired of fighting their own nature. Desiring isn't falling into sin. It's recognizing that there's a living flame within you, asking to be heard. Denying this is like covering your ears to your soul. In many cases, what a person calls weakness is just a misinterpreted request from their own unconscious. The psychology of desire, according to Jung, doesn't point to annulment, but to the transmutation of desires, the refinement of what still pulses in the dark. And there's nothing more dangerous than what's rejected without understanding. Have you seen how some people seem to wage a constant internal war? They struggle to appear pure, spiritual, untouchable. But deep down, they're in conflict with the lover archetype within themselves. When someone tries to spiritualize by eliminating desire, what happens is the spiritualization of repression. This makes you sick. Desire and spirituality aren't opposites. They're siblings, separated only by the ego's ignorance. But what if what you most fear feeling is exactly the key to your inner liberation? Maybe it's time to look at this with more courage. What happens to desire that's pushed into the dark corners of the soul? It doesn't disappear, it transforms. When someone represses their unconscious desire, it infiltrates thoughts, dreams, behaviors that seem out of control. Repressed desire becomes shadow, and like all shadows, it acts without being seen. This is how apparently centered people find themselves trapped in secret compulsions. Sexual repression, far from purifying, creates internal labyrinths that are hard to escape. This shadow of desire is treacherous because it wears masks: exaggerated jealousy, constant criticism of others' pleasure, attachment disguised as love. These are indirect ways through which conscious sexual energy tries to express itself, but without finding a healthy path. Carl Jung said that what we don't face within ourselves, we'll encounter as fate, and what we don't integrate becomes prison. The individual who ignores their own inner fire might end up being consumed by it or throwing it onto others. Think of a simple example. That person who constantly judges others for being too sensual, but secretly watches videos she herself condemns. This is the shadow in action. Instead of taming the instinct, the person feeds a cycle of repression and guilt, typical of someone who hasn't yet begun the individuation process, according to Jung. It's not about surrendering to desire without consciousness, but bringing to light what lives in darkness. After all, what you hide might be silently shaping all your choices. Instinct isn't an enemy of the soul. It's part of it. There's ancestral wisdom embedded in the impulses we feel, which are often discarded as animalistic or inferior. But in the psychology of desire, instinct is seen as one of the most potent paths to self-knowledge. The mistake is trying to spiritualize by eliminating the body, as if the soul didn't inhabit flesh. Jung's individuation process demands this encounter: body and spirit, flesh and consciousness, desire and transcendence. By denying instinct, the individual mutilates an essential part of themselves. The energy that could be used to create, love, or achieve is drained trying to maintain a morally acceptable persona. But when this instinct is integrated into the individuation process, something rare happens. The person begins to act from a true center, not from repression. Mastery over instincts at this point stops being a struggle and becomes an alliance. It's when the wild meets the sacred, and both stop excluding each other. A practical example: many who try to be pure end up emotionally sick, accumulating guilt for desiring. Others who don't repress but also don't integrate live dominated by impulse. Neither extreme promotes shadow integration. It's like trying to build a house while denying you need a foundation. The soul wants to fulfill itself completely, and this includes the body it inhabits. What many ignore is that instinct also has a language, and maybe it's time to learn to listen to it. Desire speaks, but not in words. It whispers through impulses, fantasies, restlessness. It's a symbolic language that springs from the depths of the unconscious, carrying meanings that the rational mind doesn't immediately grasp. To desire, according to the psychology of desire, is to be touched by something that hasn't been fully understood yet, but asks for expression. Conscious sexual energy, when ignored, manifests in distorted forms. When understood, it can reveal what the soul truly yearns to live. Unconscious desire is often confused with addiction or distraction, but rarely looked at as an internal code to be deciphered. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" the deeper question would be, "What is this desire trying to show me?" It might be a call to freedom, a longing for yourself, or even a need for spiritual reconnection. Sexual repression, in this context, doesn't silence the soul. It just blurs vision. The desire, then, continues there, asking for translation. Imagine someone who frequently dreams of freedom, but lives in suffocating relationships, or someone who feels attracted to experiences that don't match their own morals. These signs are maps. Desire isn't literal, it's symbolic, and it's often pointing to something much bigger than the desired object itself. At this point, shadow integration is inevitable, and whoever learns to listen to this internal language gradually begins to see that not everything we desire is what we really want, but it's almost always where truth begins to appear. Behind desire often hides the persona, that social mask we all wear to be accepted. This persona deep down wants to be desired, validated, recognized. It's like an actor on stage seeking applause but forgetting who they really are outside the lights. Desire, thus, can become a game of mirrors where what's wanted isn't genuine satisfaction, but the reflection the other gives back. In this internal theater, conscious sexual energy is used as currency without realizing it. When a person lives trapped in this dynamic, desire becomes dependent on external gaze. Spirituality, in turn, can become an empty performance, a seal to hide this deep neediness. Sexual repression in this scenario is double. It hides real desire and feeds the manufactured persona. For Jung, the persona is a necessary construction, but dangerous if never questioned. The psychology of desire warns that without this reflection, the person can get lost, becoming a slave to a desire that isn't theirs, but imposed. A clear example is the endless search for likes and approval on social media, where the desire to be desired is confused with the desire for true connection. It's like trying to quench thirst with salt water, an endless cycle. Shadow integration in this context begins when the person dares to look at this persona with brutal honesty, recognizing the mask and making space for what's behind it. Only then does desire stop being a ghost and become a real guide. The soul's true desire doesn't manifest as uncontrolled urgency, but as a serene pulsation that invites listening. Unlike compulsion that imprisons, it's gentle, almost like a subtle call that goes unnoticed by those dominated by the world's rush. In the transmutation of desires, this conscious sexual energy reveals its transformative character, showing that mastery over instincts isn't combat, but a harmonious dance between consciousness and impulse. When desire becomes compulsion, it's a clear sign that there's been a rupture in shadow integration. Sexual repression creates internal pressure, a vacuum that the ego tries to fill with immediate and superficial stimuli. Those who are in touch with their unconscious desire understand that true pleasure is born from patience, self-knowledge, balance. It's like learning to hear the silence between musical notes, where the soul's true melody lies. A practical example is observing how many people feel frustrated for not being able to sustain deep relationships or intimate moments, constantly seeking quick satisfaction. Reading works like Man and His Symbols by Jung can help better understand this dynamic. The will that comes from the soul isn't overwhelming, it's invitation, mystery, and above all, transformation. But for this, you must accept that desire and spirituality walk together, not at war. At the heart of desire pulses the lover archetype, but it doesn't always arrive in its full form. Often, it's the wounded lover who guides our passions, marked by old pains, rejections, and unhealed neediness. This archetype doesn't just seek pleasure, it seeks repair, recognition, and deeper meaning for desire. It carries within itself the tension between instinctual fire and the need for care. And it's in this conflict that conscious sexual energy can either destroy itself or transform. The wounded lover's shadow manifests in toxic relationships, endless search for validation, or inability to surrender authentically. This pattern can result from sexual repression that prevented natural expression of the soul, creating a self-feeding wound. Shadow integration involves facing these pains with courage, recognizing that the path to mastering desire begins with accepting one's own wounds, not denying them. Imagine someone who lives attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, repeating cycles that seem impossible to break. This is a classic example of the wounded lover seeking, in pain, an echo of their own incompleteness. Jung's individuation process suggests that by transforming these wounds into consciousness, desire stops being enslaved to the past and becomes creative force for life. But how to take this step without getting lost in desire's shadows? That's the next part of the journey. The soul's genuine desire doesn't dissociate from the will that moves a person toward a greater purpose. On the path of mastering instincts, understanding this triad is essential. Desire transforms when it finds aligned will and purpose that transcends mere immediate pleasure. The psychology of desire shows that conscious sexual energy, when directed by clear intention, becomes a powerful force of creation and personal transformation. It's the meeting between internal wanting and life's meaning. Sexual repression, on the other hand, fragments this triad, creating a dichotomy between what's wanted and what can be expressed. This generates internal conflicts, anxiety, and emptiness. The individual ends up trapped in search cycles that seem to lead nowhere, precisely for not recognizing desire as an integral part of their individuation journey, according to Jung. For many, the challenge is learning to distinguish between passing desires and those that come from the soul's core, which point to their real purpose. A practical example is in people who feel constantly unsatisfied, changing jobs, relationships, and lifestyle, trying to fill a void. Reading about archetype theory can help identify which internal energy is being neglected. When desire meets will, there's no more space for compulsion or repression. The possibility emerges to live with authenticity and true passion. But this deep connection requires a step few dare to take. Sex goes far beyond the physical act. It's a manifestation of vital energy that can be channeled for inner transformation. When conscious sexual energy is awakened, It becomes a powerful engine of evolution, capable of driving creativity, spirituality, and self-knowledge. In analytical psychology, this phenomenon is linked to the transmutation of desires, the ability to convert raw instinct into creative and conscious force, a true foundation for individuation, according to Jung. Sexual repression, conversely, blocks this energy, creating internal fissures and disconnections with one's own body and soul. Many people live dissociated from this energy, experiencing frustration and emptiness, without understanding that mastery over instincts doesn't mean denial, but integration. Conscious sexual energy, when aligned with purpose and will, can open doors to deeper levels of experience, where desire and spirituality intertwine in a sublime dance. An example to illustrate, practices like Tantra or Tantric meditation teach using sexual energy to expand consciousness, not to simply seek immediate pleasure. These techniques are concrete paths for those who want to transmute desire and use it as a source of internal power. But this journey isn't simple. It requires discipline, self-knowledge, and courage to face the shadows of one's own being. And it's precisely in this challenge that mastery over desire finds its reason for being. Mastering desire isn't an act of repression, but a deep exercise in self-mastery, where the individual takes control of their own life. In the psychology of desire, this mastery is a fundamental step in individuation, according to Jung, because only those who integrate the shadow and understand their internal forces can walk toward true freedom. Conscious sexual energy, when controlled with wisdom, transforms into a powerful ally for personal and spiritual realization. It's not about denying impulse, but recognizing it as part of the deep self and knowing when and how it should be expressed. Sexual repression is a sign of fear, while mastery over instincts reveals courage and self-knowledge. This transmutation of desires requires discipline and active listening, because unconscious desire doesn't disappear, it just changes form, and those who don't master end up being mastered. It's the eternal dance between instinct and consciousness. Imagine a person who learned to channel their conscious sexual energy to create, love, and transform their life, without being carried away by compulsions or fears. This is the true archetype of the integrated lover, who finds in desire not a villain, but a path to mastery over themselves. The journey is long and challenging, but those who travel it discover that mastery over desire is, in fact, mastery over one's own soul. And so the story continues, because there's still much more to explore. Now that you've discovered how desire, far from being an enemy, is a key to self-mastery, how about starting to look inward with more courage? Are you ready to face your own shadows and transform your conscious sexual energy into a life engine? Ask yourself, how many times was desire repressed and ended up dominating you behind the curtains? What if the path to freedom passes through integrating, not denying? What pulses in your depths? Share in the comments your reflections. How do you deal with this impulse? This is the invitation to leave the cycle of repression and enter the dance of integration. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the next content that will deepen this journey through mastery over instincts and the psychology of desire. And in the meantime, check out the video on the final screen. It can help you see the ghosts that still prevent you from moving forward. Let's join us in this transformation.